Have you ever felt the overwhelming weight of loss, where every step forward feels like a struggle against the tide? For Scarlet Grace, this feeling was all too real. After losing her beloved husband, her life was consumed by grief and the challenge of raising their son alone. But one night, under the dim light of a sorrowful evening, everything changed. The impossible happened. She saw him, or at least someone who looked like him, vanishing into a dark alley. Her journey of love, mystery, and relentless determination to protect her family began that night. From moments of joy with her son to the crushing weight of fear, Scarlet's world was turned upside down. But with unwavering courage and the support of those she loved, she embarked on a mission to uncover the truth about her husband's death. What followed was a battle against powerful forces determined to keep their secrets hidden, and Scarlet was forced to confront challenges that tested her strength like never before. Yet, amidst the darkness, there was light. Love and hope pulled her through, leading her to the truth and a reunion she never thought possible. This story is one of resilience, of family, and of the power of love to conquer even the most insurmountable odds. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Under the dim light of a sorrowful night, a lone widow wandered through the silent streets, her heart heavy with the unbearable grief of losing her beloved husband. Tears streamed down her face as her mind replayed the moments they had shared, now forever lost. Every step echoed the profound loneliness that clung to her soul like an unforgiving shadow. As she turned a corner, her breath caught in her throat, and her skin turned ashen with fear. Before her stood a figure she could scarcely believe her husband, or so it seemed, vanishing into a dark, mysterious alley. Scarlet Grace, a woman whose strength had always been admired by those around her, now found herself battling the deepest sorrow she had ever known. Though grief threatened to consume her entirely, she remained steadfast for the sake of their young son, Matthew, who was only 8 years old. The weight of her husband's death pressed heavily on her, but she couldn't afford to crumble, not when Matthew needed her more than ever. Every day, without fail, Scarlet would open her wallet to read the last note her husband had left her. The words, scribbled with love, were now her lifeline. "I love you, my dear. Believe in yourself." These simple yet powerful words were his final gift to her, written just before he tragically lost his life in the line of duty as a police officer. His death had shattered her world. Her once glossy black hair now hung dull and lifeless. Her vibrant brown eyes had dimmed with sorrow, and even her tanned skin seemed to have lost its healthy glow, reflecting the grief that burdened her heart. Mornings were a blur of hurried routines. She would tuck the precious note into her wallet, feeling its familiar comfort as she rushed to get Matthew ready for school. "Come on, Matthew, we can't be late," she called out, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. "Yes, Mommy. I'm coming," Matthew responded with the same enthusiasm he always had. His presence was her only solace, for he was the living image of his father. Those gray eyes, so much like Henry's, would light up when he smiled, and for a brief moment, Scarlet would feel a flicker of happiness amidst her grief. As they walked together through the bustling streets, every step felt like a reminder of Henry's absence. The emptiness gnawed at her, and she wondered if the pain would ever fade, or if she was destined to carry it forever. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the small hand in hers, the hand of the little boy who depended on her. But then, something or someone caught her eye. Across the street, a man stood, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. He looked just like Henry. The same height, the same build, even the same way he held himself. Scarlet's heart raced, pounding so loudly in her chest that she feared it might burst. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Hope flared in her heart, only to be crushed by the weight of reality. But before she could steady herself, Matthew squeezed her hand gently, his voice full of innocent concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" His wide, worried eyes looked up at her, grounding her in the present moment. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm just a little tired," she lied, forcing a smile for his sake. But inside, her mind was racing, spinning with questions that had no answers. Was she losing her grip on reality? Had grief pushed her to the edge of madness? These thoughts circled endlessly in her mind until Matthew's voice broke through once more. "Mommy, is that Daddy?" His voice was filled with a naive joy that made Scarlett's heart ache. How could he see it too? Was this some cruel trick of the mind, or was there something more? She swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "No, darling," she whispered, her voice shaky as she struggled to hold back the tears. "Daddy's with the angels now." Her words felt like shards of glass in her mouth. She gently handed him his backpack, her gaze never leaving the man across the street, the man who looked so much like Henry that it made her question everything she knew. "Go on, Matthew, I'm sure your teacher is eager to see the drawing you made." She encouraged him, masking her turmoil with a trembling smile. But as she watched her son walk toward the school, her eyes remained fixed on the figure in the distance, and her heart was caught in a painful tug of war between hope and reality. "That's right, Mommy. Daddy went to heaven with the angels. I'll make him another nice drawing so he can see it from up there," Matthew said sweetly, kissing his mother on the cheek before waving goodbye at the school gate. Scarlett stood there for a moment, watching her son disappear into the schoolyard, feeling that familiar tug of maternal worry slowly transforming into something else, an intense, almost consuming curiosity. But when she turned back to the spot where the mysterious man had stood just moments ago, he was gone, vanished without a trace. Her heart sank. Am I losing my mind? Are Matthew and I imagining things? She wondered. It had only been a few weeks since Henry's death, and the absence of him seemed to weigh more heavily each day, distorting her reality. Later, still shaken by the encounter, Scarlett reached out to Zoe, Henry's only sister, for help. She rarely asked for favors, knowing how busy Zoe was as a successful lawyer, but today was different. She needed just a few minutes of peace, a break from the constant weight on her shoulders. "Zoe, could you watch Matthew for a little while?" she asked hesitantly, feeling a pang of guilt. Zoe, always kind and understanding, didn't hesitate. "Of course, Scarlett. You're doing an amazing job raising Matthew, but don't ever hesitate to lean on me. I'm here for you, and my brother would be so proud of how you're handling everything," Zoe said, her gaze filled with warmth and admiration. Despite Zoe's reassurances, Scarlett still couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. She wasn't used to handling everything on her own, and the weight of single motherhood felt crushing at times. Recently, she had taken a brief vacation from her job as a cleaner, giving her some space to adjust to this new reality. But the days felt endless, and the pressure to stay strong for Matthew was overwhelming. She knew she couldn't let him see her break down. He needed her to be strong, even when it felt impossible. Needing a moment to clear her mind, Scarlett decided to take a walk, hoping that the fresh air would help her push aside the sorrow that constantly threatened to engulf her. "I can't cry in front of Matthew. I need to be strong for him. Walking will help," she thought, taking a deep breath as she stepped outside. But just a few steps down the street, the floodgates opened, and she couldn't hold back the tears. "I miss you so much, Henry," she whispered to the empty street, her voice cracking with the weight of her grief. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, or someone at the end of the street. Her breath hitched as her gaze locked on the figure entering a dark alley. It was him. It had to be him. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward the alley, her feet moving on their own, driven by a desperate hope she couldn't quite explain. "I must be losing my mind," she thought, but the pull was too strong to resist. As she got closer, the man turned around and their eyes met. His gaze was so familiar, so achingly familiar, that Scarlett felt her heart leap into her throat. She struggled to steady her voice as she spoke. "I'm sorry, but you look very familiar," she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her words. The man didn't answer right away, but she noticed he was wearing the same clothes she had seen him in earlier that day, near Matthew's school. Even the scent of his cologne was the same, and it wrapped around her like a memory she couldn't escape. "Please, say you're Henry," she silently pleaded, her mind racing with possibilities. Could it really be him? Could he somehow have come back to her? She held her breath, waiting for the man to speak, hoping beyond hope that she wasn't just chasing ghosts. The man gazed at her with an inscrutable expression, his gray eyes widening as though something deep within him stirred at the sight of Scarlett. But then, just as quickly, it seemed as if he was forcing himself to stay distant, to pretend he didn't know her. "That's an interesting thing to say," he replied, his voice soft yet steady, almost detached. Well, I can't remember much about my past. There was an accident. I lost my memory. But seeing you, there's something familiar about you, something that tugs at the edges of my mind." His words struck Scarlett like a thunderbolt. She felt her heart leap into her throat, making it hard to breathe. "What do you mean you don't remember?" she asked, her voice laced with both disbelief and an undercurrent of desperate hope. "You don't know who you are?" The man ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to recall anything more. His brow furrowed as he spoke, as if fighting against the haze in his mind. "It's complicated," he admitted. "I woke up in a hospital months ago, no memory of who I was. They told me I was lucky to be alive after the accident, but as for remembering who I am, or who I used to be, that's still a mystery." Scarlett stood there, absorbing every word, feeling the emotional weight of his revelation settle heavily on her chest. "And you think you know me?" she asked cautiously, a wild mix of fear and hope swirling in her heart. As she looked closer at him, though, small details began to stand out. His features were eerily similar to Henry's, yet not entirely the same. There was a hardness in his eyes that Henry never had, a cruel edge that unsettled her. His jawline was sharper, his expression colder. Still, the resemblance was undeniable. "Do you remember anything else?" she pressed, even though part of her feared she was grasping at straws, desperate for something that couldn't possibly be true. The man sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know. I just moved to this neighborhood recently. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, trying to fill in the blanks," he said, sounding more disturbed with each word. "I'm sorry. I have to go." Without waiting for a response, he abruptly turned and started to walk away, then broke into a run, as if fleeing from something that terrified him, perhaps from Scarlett herself. In his haste, a document slipped from his pocket and fell to the ground. "Wait, your document," Scarlett called after him, her voice tinged with urgency. But he didn't stop. He disappeared around the corner, leaving Scarlett standing there, clutching the paper he had dropped. She looked down at the document in her hands, her fingers trembling as she read the name printed on it, Sebastian Jack. Her gaze shifted to the photo attached, and once again, the striking resemblance to Henry sent her mind spinning. How could two people look so much alike? And why had he acted like he recognized her? Scarlett's thoughts raced as she made her way back home, Sebastian's document clutched tightly in her hand. The encounter had planted a seed of doubt deep in her heart, a seed she couldn't easily ignore. Could it be possible? Could Henry somehow be alive, wandering around with a new identity? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the absurd thought, but the possibility gnawed at her. The man had claimed to have no memory, and yet, the way he had looked at her, the flicker of recognition in his eyes, it had felt so real. "Am I going mad?" she whispered to herself as she entered her home, closing the door behind her. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. It seemed impossible, and yet the idea wouldn't leave her alone. Maybe Henry had survived, but the accident had altered his appearance slightly. Plastic surgery could do that, couldn't it? Change the angles of a face, make someone almost but not quite the person you once knew. No, it can't be," she muttered, trying to shake the thought away. But still, doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. Henry had died in the line of duty as a police officer, in an act of violence so brutal that it had left her shattered. She had never had the chance to say goodbye, never had the closure that others might find in a final farewell. All she had was the memory of him alive, vibrant, and strong. Maybe that's why the idea of him still being out there, alive but lost to her, clung so fiercely to her heart. She couldn't let go. Not yet. This realization hit Scarlett like a tidal wave. Everything suddenly seemed to click into place. The fact that she hadn't seen Henry's body, hadn't been given that final moment of closure, opened the door to a terrifying yet hopeful possibility. Could it be that Henry wasn't truly gone? Could he be alive somewhere, lost and confused as Sebastian Jack? This persistent doubt gnawed at her, leaving her restless and determined. She had to know the truth. Driven by the desperate need for answers, Scarlett made her way to Henry's office at the police station, hoping to find something, anything that might provide an explanation. The familiar scent of Henry's cologne still lingered in the air, clinging to the old papers and worn leather chair, as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. The thought brought a lump to her throat, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. She began searching through Henry's work documents, rifling through stacks of papers, reports, and notes. Somewhere in this office, she believed, there had to be a clue that would explain who Sebastian Jack really was. Then, in a moment of pure instinct, she noticed something odd about Henry's desk. She ran her fingers along the bottom of one of the drawers, feeling for anything unusual, and to her surprise, she found a false bottom. With trembling hands, she pried it open, revealing a folder discreetly marked with the name Sebastian Jack. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened it, her breath catching in her throat as she uncovered a series of documents and photos. The pieces began to fall into place. Henry had known Sebastian, or perhaps they were the same person. Scarlett carefully examined the photos of Sebastian, her eyes scanning every detail. The resemblance to Henry was uncanny, yet there were subtle differences. His expression was a touch harder, his features slightly sharper, almost as if life had worn him down in a way it never had Henry. But the similarities were undeniable. Could Henry have survived whatever terrible event had taken his life, only to re-emerge as Sebastian Jack? The thought made her head spin. Among the documents, Scarlett found something that made her blood run cold: a photo of Henry, unmistakable, yet the name on the document wasn't his own. It read Sebastian Jack. The implications were staggering. Had Henry been living under an assumed identity? Was he protecting someone, or perhaps protecting himself by using Sebastian's name? Scarlett's mind raced with possibilities, each more confusing than the last. But one thing was clear: Henry had been involved in something dangerous, something that had ultimately led to his death or disappearance. She couldn't be sure of anything anymore. The fact that his death might have been part of a larger, more complex situation only deepened her determination to find out what had really happened. If Henry had survived and was now living as Sebastian, could his amnesia be real? Or was it a carefully constructed lie, meant to protect him from the shadows of his past? Scarlett knew she couldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. She needed to find Sebastian again, confront him, and get the answers that had eluded her for so long. "I need answers," she whispered to herself, her voice filled with steely resolve. The wound of losing Henry had never healed, and this new possibility that he might still be out there, alive, made the ache even sharper. She couldn't let it go. Not now. Not when the fragile hope of reuniting with him still lingered in the air. With renewed determination, Scarlett made a vow to herself she would track down Sebastian Jack and unravel the tangled web that connected him to Henry. Whether it ended in heartbreak or the miracle of finding her husband alive, she had to know. Only then could she finally close the chapter on this agonizing uncertainty, once and for all. The next morning, after she kissed Matthew goodbye at the school gate, Scarlett found herself driving toward the address she had discovered in Henry's papers. Her thoughts churned with doubt and fear. Should I keep chasing this ghost? She wondered, the weight of her uncertainty pressing down on her chest. But then, just as quickly she resolved, "I can't live with this doubt hanging over me." She gripped the steering wheel tighter as she approached an old, weathered building that matched the address. Scarlett reached into her bag and felt the cold steel of Henry's old gun. It was heavy in her hands, a stark contrast to the warmth and softness he had always praised in her. "You've got Baker's hands, Scarlett. Gentle, kind, meant for creating, not destroying," he used to say with a smile. Yet here she was, clutching a weapon she had never imagined she would need, the world she once knew unraveling before her. Despite the mounting evidence in Henry's documents, which pointed to his possible involvement with dangerous people, she refused to believe that her husband was capable of betraying her. "No," she thought, shaking her head. "My Henry wouldn't lie to me. He wouldn't become a criminal." Taking a deep breath, she approached the door and rang the bell. The sound echoed through the dimly lit hallway, amplifying the tension in her chest. She waited, each second dragging out like an eternity. Nothing. The door remained stubbornly closed, denying her entry and with it, the answers she desperately sought. Maybe no one's home, she thought, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was hidden behind that door. Scarlett was about to ring the bell again when she heard the creak of a door opening across the hall. She turned to see a man stepping out of a neighboring apartment, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Seizing the opportunity, Scarlett walked over to him, trying to keep her voice steady. "Excuse me, I don't mean to bother you, but I'm looking for someone. Sebastian Jack. Does he live here?" The man regarded her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Sebastian? Yeah, he was here. But he moved out last night, left in a hurry. Said he needed to go, didn't say why." His tone was casual, almost indifferent, as if this was just another day in a neighborhood used to people disappearing without a trace. Scarlett's heart sank. He was gone. The last thread she had been clinging to had unraveled before her eyes. The man had vanished, taking with him any hope of getting closer to the truth about Henry and the mysteries that connected them. She forced a smile and thanked the neighbor, who was already glancing at his watch, clearly eager to get on with his day. Now alone in the hallway once again, Scarlett felt the cold weight of defeat settling over her. But as her mind raced, she remembered something: Henry's voice in her ear, patient and gentle, teaching her how to pick a lock with a hairpin. It had been years ago, after she had been locked out of the house and left to bake in the scorching sun. Henry had come home, laughing at her predicament, but immediately showing her how to solve the problem on her own. He had always been thoughtful like that, always looking out for her in ways both big and small. "So you never have to wait out in the heat again," he had said with a wink. She reached into her bag and pulled out a hairpin, her heart pounding. "I need to know the truth," she whispered to herself. Looking over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching, she bent down to the lock and began to work. The hallway was eerily quiet, save for the faint clicks of the lock mechanism under her hands. She held her breath, her pulse racing, knowing that once she opened that door, there would be no turning back. With a soft click, the lock finally gave way, and the door swung open. Scarlett stepped inside, the air inside the apartment stale and thick with the scent of abandonment. She closed the door quietly behind her and scanned the room, her eyes searching for any sign of Sebastian or perhaps a piece of Henry she had yet to discover. What she found was a sparsely furnished living space, with nothing but a few scattered papers and a suitcase hastily left open on the floor. Scarlett approached the suitcase, her hands trembling as she sifted through its contents. Clothes, toiletries, nothing out of the ordinary until she found a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath the clothing. She flipped it open, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized Henry's handwriting. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, filled with references to dangerous operations and protecting Scarlett and Matthew at all costs. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized what Henry had been trying to shield her from. This wasn't just about Sebastian Jack, it was about Henry's desperate attempt to keep his family safe from something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The final entry sent a chill down her spine. If anything happens to me, they'll come for Sebastian. He's the key. Don't let them find him. Scarlett closed the journal, her mind spinning with the weight of what she had uncovered. Henry had been involved in something dangerous, something that had cost him his life or had it. The possibility that Henry and Sebastian were somehow intertwined, that her husband might still be out there somewhere, filled her with both hope and dread. Scarlett knew that her search was far from over. She needed to find Sebastian again, to confront him with what she had discovered, and to uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. She couldn't rest until she had answers. Taking a deep breath, Scarlett pushed the door open and stepped into Sebastian's apartment. The hairpin she had used to unlock the door now sat in her pocket, a reminder of the skills Henry had taught her, though she never imagined she'd need them for something like this. Inside, the apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy with secrets. A chill ran down her spine as she took in the disarray before her, papers strewn across the table, clothes haphazardly thrown over a chair, and a half-empty cup of coffee sitting cold on the kitchen counter. "I knew he was hiding something," Scarlett whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible in the stillness. She began to move carefully through the space, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. Every step she took felt like stepping deeper into a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to solve, yet she couldn't stop herself. She had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Scarlett meticulously searched the apartment, opening drawers, sifting through papers, and checking every corner for clues. It was then, tucked away in a corner behind a suitcase, that she found it, a small leather-bound diary. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, the worn pages filled with notes written in what appeared to be a code. The scribbles were indecipherable at first glance, a jumble of letters and symbols that made no sense to her. But as she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye, something that made her blood run cold. There, nestled between the pages, was a photograph of Henry. The image showed him smiling, looking younger, happier, just as she remembered him in the early days of their marriage. But it wasn't the photo alone that stopped her in her tracks, it was the note written beside it. In Henry's own familiar handwriting, "The mission is getting dangerous. Al insists we can trust each other with our lives. I hope he's right." Scarlett felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she read those words. Her breath caught in her throat, and tears began to well in her eyes. What had Henry been involved in? Why had he kept this part of his life hidden from her? The discovery that Henry had known Sebastian, that they had been part of some dangerous mission together, was a puzzle piece she never expected to find. Suddenly, the threads of her life began to unravel in ways she hadn't anticipated. "What were you doing, Henry?" she murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. The idea that her husband had lived a secret life, one that might have ultimately led to his death, was almost too much to bear. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of information she had uncovered. The diary, the coded notes, the photo of Henry, it all pointed to a hidden world she hadn't known existed. But that wasn't all she found in the apartment. As she continued searching, Scarlett stumbled upon forged documents, passports, identification cards, all with different names and faces. There were even photographs of people she didn't recognize, likely victims of whatever criminal organization Sebastian, or perhaps Henry, had been involved with. The implications were staggering. Henry, her kind and loving husband, had been caught up in something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. "How could I trust you, Henry?" she whispered, her voice thick with anguish. Yet despite the betrayal, the pain, Scarlett knew she couldn't stop now. She couldn't just walk away from this. The diary held more than just memories, it held answers. If she could decipher the coded notes, perhaps she could unravel the mystery of Henry's death and understand the dangerous mission he had been on. And maybe, just maybe, there was a message in those pages meant for her, something Henry had wanted her to find. Her thoughts drifted to Matthew, remembering how Henry had loved teaching him to solve puzzles. It was a special bond they had shared, and the thought brought a bittersweet smile to Scarlett's face. Maybe there's something here he wanted me to figure out. She pondered, the determination in her heart burning stronger despite the pain. With the diary clutched tightly in her hands, Scarlett stood up, her resolve hardening. She needed help, someone who could decode the notes, someone who could help her navigate the labyrinth of secrets Henry had left behind. But no matter what she found, no matter where this journey took her, she knew she couldn't turn back now. The truth, no matter how painful, was the only way forward. Scarlett's fingers trembled as she picked up the photograph of Matthew, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and confusion. The image showed her son playing in the park, blissfully unaware that he was being watched and photographed. His carefree smile, the way his hair caught the sunlight, it was a snapshot of innocence, a moment of pure joy. But seeing that image here, in Sebastian's apartment, amidst the remnants of a dangerous life she didn't fully understand, sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Why is this here?" she whispered, barely able to voice the question that consumed her. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. The fact that Sebastian, this mysterious man who resembled her late husband, had a photo of her son suggested a connection that went beyond Henry's secret life. Could Matthew be in danger? Had her husband's actions put their son at risk? The thought was unbearable, and Scarlett's protective instincts surged to the surface. "If they harm my son, I'll destroy them," she vowed, her voice trembling with the intensity of her resolve. She tucked the photo away carefully, alongside the diary. The fierce determination that filled her was unlike anything she had ever felt before. This wasn't just about uncovering Henry's secrets anymore. This was about protecting Matthew, ensuring that no harm came to him because of something buried in the past. She had to be smart, calculated. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Scarlett moved quickly, photographing everything in the apartment that might be of importance. Every piece of paper, every document, she captured it all. Her search became more urgent, more methodical. And then, hidden within a table clock, she found a small USB drive. The sight of it sent a jolt of electricity through her. This tiny device could hold the key to unlocking everything the mission Henry had been involved in, the connection between him and Sebastian, and maybe even the reason why Matthew's photo was here. With the diary, the photo of Matthew, and the USB drive securely in her possession, Scarlett knew she had to proceed with extreme caution. "I need to be smart about this," she thought, her mind racing with plans. She couldn't risk putting Matthew or herself in more danger, but she also couldn't afford to walk away now. Whatever was on that USB drive, whatever secrets were hidden in the diary's coded notes, she had to find out. She needed help, someone she could trust to navigate this web of deceit and danger. But who? And how? As she left the apartment, Scarlett's thoughts returned to Henry. She couldn't shake the image of him smiling at her, his eyes full of love and encouragement. "Trust yourself, you will make it," he had said to her so many times when she doubted herself. He had believed in her dream of owning a bakery, even when everyone else laughed at her for being a housemaid with big dreams. He had always been her biggest supporter, her rock. How could that same man have been involved in something so dark, so dangerous? How could he be a criminal, she murmured, feeling the weight of her conflicting emotions. She couldn't reconcile the sweet, caring man she had known with the man the evidence seemed to point to. The thought of Henry lying to her, deceiving her all these years, was almost too painful to bear. But there had to be more to the story, something she wasn't seeing yet. Scarlett refused to believe that the man she loved could have been capable of such betrayal. As she drove away from the apartment, Scarlett's resolve only grew stronger. "I will find out what you were trying to tell me, Henry," she whispered, clutching the USB drive in her hand. It can't be that you always lied to me." She couldn't allow herself to think that way. Not yet. There had to be an explanation, a reason for all of this, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter how deep or dark the truth turned out to be. Nothing was more important than protecting Matthew, and if that meant facing the shadows of Henry's past, she was ready. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but Scarlett knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't stop until she had the answers she needed. The sudden darkness swallowed the apartment, and Scarlett's heart raced as she was immobilized by shock. Before she could react, a firm hand clamped over her mouth, stifling the scream that threatened to escape her lips. The icy grip of fear tightened around her chest, and then she heard a voice, so familiar, so hauntingly close that it sent shivers down her spine. "Don't get involved in this, Scarlett. Go home. I love you, my dear." It was Henry's voice. The words, spoken with the same tenderness she had heard countless times before, now carried a sinister weight. Confusion and despair overwhelmed her as she struggled to comprehend how this could be possible. How could Henry be here, in the dark, when he was supposed to be dead? She fought against the hands holding her, but they were too strong. And then, just as abruptly as they had grabbed her, they let go. Scarlett stumbled, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the darkness pressed in around her. "Henry," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. But there was no answer. As her eyes began to adjust, she searched desperately for any sign of him, but the apartment was still, as if she had imagined it all. Her mind reeled with questions, but the most alarming realization hit her like a punch to the gut: the photo of Matthew, the one she had held just moments before, was gone. Panic surged through her veins. Someone had taken it. Someone who had been close enough to grab her in the dark, close enough to whisper in her ear. The situation was far more dangerous and personal than she had ever imagined. Scarlett felt betrayed, terrified, and utterly alone. She had to get out of there now. With shaking hands, she grabbed the USB drive and stuffed it into her bag. She couldn't afford to leave anything behind, so she swept up every document she could find, shoving them hastily into her bag as well. Her movements were frantic, driven by the fierce, protective instinct that screamed at her to get to Matthew, to ensure his safety. "I have to get my son from school. It's not safe now," she thought, her mind racing as she imagined every worst-case scenario. But gathering the documents in the pitch-black apartment took longer than she anticipated. Her hands fumbled over papers and objects, her body tense with the overwhelming urge to run, to flee this place and never look back. Every second felt like an eternity as her fear gnawed at her, urging her to hurry. Finally, with everything she could find crammed into her bag, Scarlett made her escape, her breath shallow and her pulse pounding in her ears. When she finally arrived at Matthew's school, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the playground. Children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing through the air, but something felt off. Scarlett scanned the group, searching for her son's familiar face, but her heart sank as she realized that Matthew wasn't among them. A cold, gnawing dread crept into her chest. She hurried toward the teacher, who seemed distracted, chatting with another parent at the edge of the playground. "Excuse me, where's Matthew?" Scarlett asked, her voice trembling with urgency. The teacher looked at her with a confused expression. "Matthew," the teacher repeated, glancing around as if only now realizing he was missing. "He was here earlier. I didn't notice him leave." Scarlett's world tilted on its axis. Panic gripped her throat, making it hard to breathe. How could this happen, she thought frantically. She turned away from the teacher, her mind racing. She had to find him. She had to find her son before it was too late. The fear that had been gnawing at her since she found the photo in Sebastian's apartment now exploded into full-blown terror. The dangerous world Henry had been involved in, the criminals who had taken everything from her, it was all closing in. And now they had her son. "I will find you, Matthew. I swear I will," Scarlett vowed, her determination hardening into steel. With everything against her, with danger lurking in every shadow, she would not stop. Not until her son was safe, and not until she uncovered the truth that had been tearing her life apart. The teacher's words echoed in Scarlett's mind, reverberating through her consciousness like the tolling of a death knell. "Your husband came to pick him up a few minutes ago." The shock and horror of those words sent her spiraling into a nightmare she couldn't escape. How could this be? Henry was dead. She had lived with that reality every day for weeks. But now, the unthinkable had happened. Her son was gone, taken by someone claiming to be her husband. "My husband," Scarlett's voice trembled as she spoke, barely able to form the words. Her mind raced, the terror clawing at her from all directions. This can't be happening, she thought, as panic set in. She realized, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that in the midst of her grief and chaos, she had forgotten to inform the school of Henry's death. She hadn't protected Matthew like she should have, and now, it might be too late. Without wasting another second, Scarlett bolted out of the school, her body moving on autopilot. Panic fueled her steps, making her legs move faster than she thought possible. She didn't know where she was running to, only that she had to find her son, had to undo this nightmare. But before she could process her next move, her phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through her panic like a blade. With trembling hands, she answered, and what she heard on the other end made her blood turn to ice. A distorted voice, one she didn't recognize, spoke with chilling calmness. "Scarlett, if you keep looking for answers, your Matthew won't be safe. Give up now and he will come home safely." Those words hit her like a sledgehammer, breaking down every ounce of control she had left. The world around her seemed to collapse in on itself. Scarlett's worst fear, losing her son, now hung over her like a death sentence. Her mind whirled with thoughts of Matthew, of how terrified he must be, of what those people might do to him if she didn't comply. She couldn't let anything happen to him. Nothing in the world mattered more than keeping him safe. But then, the thought of Henry pierced through her panic. If Henry is alive, if he's in trouble, the idea of abandoning him, of not knowing what had happened to him, was like a knife twisting in her gut. Could she really give up the search for the truth? Could she live with herself if she never found out what had happened to the man she loved? But if she continued, she might lose Matthew. The decision tore at her soul. She felt paralyzed by fear and guilt, caught in an impossible choice. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" Scarlett demanded, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage and terror. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, only amplifying the sense of powerlessness she felt. "If you harm my son, I'll destroy you," she spat, her voice filled with a fierce, desperate determination. Her heart pounded in her chest, a wild and erratic rhythm, as she fought to control the tremor in her voice. The voice on the phone remained calm, unnervingly so. "Do as you're told, Scarlett, and no harm will come to Matthew. Continue this search, and you'll never see him again." With that, the line went dead, leaving Scarlett standing in the middle of the street, her world crashing down around her. Scarlett's breath came in shallow, panicked gasps as she lowered the phone from her ear. She felt the weight of the threat pressing down on her, suffocating her. She wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse from the sheer terror of it all, but she couldn't. She couldn't fall apart now. Not when Matthew needed her. Not when the stakes were this high. She had to think, had to plan. If she didn't play this carefully, she might lose everything. But how could she protect Matthew and still find out the truth about Henry? How could she navigate a world of criminals and deception without risking the safety of the person she loved most in this world? Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away, forcing herself to stay strong. She had no choice but to follow the demands of the voice on the phone for now. But that didn't mean she would give up entirely. Scarlett vowed silently to herself that she would find a way to protect Matthew while still uncovering the truth, even if it meant walking a razor's edge between life and death, between hope and despair. She had to be smart, careful. And most of all, she had to be brave. The words echoed in Scarlett's mind, a chilling reminder of the impossible choices she faced. It's not who I am that matters, it's what you do from now on. Give up, Scarlett. For Matthew, the call had ended abruptly, but the threat lingered, heavy and suffocating. She stood frozen, the silence of the room pressing in around her, and knew what she had to do. The weight of her love for Matthew bore down on her, a fierce and protective love that left no room for hesitation. I love you, Matthew. I'll keep you safe, no matter the cost, she whispered to herself, clutching onto that silent promise, as if it were the only thing keeping her afloat. Agonizing hours crawled by, each moment stretching into an eternity as she waited for any sign of her son. Time seemed to have stopped altogether until, finally, Matthew appeared at the door. Scarlett's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and dread. He was safe, but at what cost? Her son's face lit up with pure joy as he ran to her. "Mommy, I had ice cream with Daddy," he exclaimed, his small arms wrapping around her waist with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat, her worst fears mingling with confusion. "What, my love?" she asked, her voice trembling as she struggled to maintain her composure, feeling as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "Daddy took me to the park, and we had ice cream." "He's not in heaven anymore," Mommy, Matthew said with such innocence, his smile wide and carefree. He looked at her with bright eyes, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. His words cut through her like knives, each one deepening the wound in her heart. The reunion with her son was a brief moment of solace, but the circumstances thrust her deeper into an abyss of fear and uncertainty. "He's not in heaven anymore." Mommy, how could Matthew speak so confidently, so innocently about seeing his father, when Henry was supposed to be dead? Who was this man masquerading as her husband, dragging Matthew into this dangerous charade? Scarlett's mind raced with questions that had no answers, her thoughts spiraling out of control. The house, once a sanctuary of love and warmth, now felt suffocating, like a prison built from shadows and doubt. Scarlett clung to Matthew as he continued to chatter happily about his time with Daddy, but her thoughts were far from the present. Friends and family had told her to move on, to accept that Henry was gone. They had insisted she was creating fantasies, illusions to cope with her grief. "He's gone, Scarlett," they would say. "Stop suspecting everything. There's nothing there." But now Matthew's words were like a haunting echo of the very doubts she had been grappling with. How could she ignore the possibility that something was very, very wrong? How could she turn away from the truth when it was staring her in the face, no matter how dangerous that truth might be? As Matthew finally drifted off to sleep, safe in his bed, Scarlett remained awake, wrestling with the demons of doubt and fear. Her mind wouldn't let her rest, wouldn't let her escape the gnawing questions that plagued her. What did Henry want to tell me? What was he trying to protect? The loneliness of her search had once been bearable, a quiet burden she carried on her own. But now, with the shadow of danger looming over her and Matthew, that loneliness had become crushing. She looked at her son's peaceful face as he slept, his small form curled up under the blankets. Her promise to keep him safe battled fiercely against her need for answers. If she continued to dig, she knew she'd be risking everything: Matthew's safety, her own life, the fragile remnants of her peace. But if she didn't, if she retreated into the safety of solitude, she would have to live with the gnawing uncertainty, the questions that would never be answered. Could she truly live with that? Could she live with not knowing what had really happened to Henry, with the possibility that he was out there, in trouble, and she had turned her back on him? Tears threatened to spill over, but Scarlett blinked them back. She had to be strong, for Matthew, for herself. But the choice before her was tearing her apart. Every option seemed cruel, every path fraught with danger and pain. The one thing she knew for certain was that she couldn't do this alone. But who could she trust? Who could she turn to in this dark, twisted game where nothing was what it seemed? The isolation of her search pressed in on her from all sides, suffocating her as she sat alone in the darkened house. She couldn't trust anyone, not her friends, not her family. They didn't understand they couldn't. They had told her to move on, to let go, but how could she when the very fabric of her reality was unraveling? And yet, in the quiet of the night, with Matthew safely asleep and the weight of her decisions pressing down on her, Scarlett knew that she had no choice but to keep going. She had to find the truth, no matter the cost. But as she stared at the dark ceiling above her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. That time was running out. Scarlett's sleepless night had led her to one inevitable conclusion: she couldn't walk away, not when there was so much at stake. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions, not when Matthew's safety and Henry's memory were on the line. With renewed determination, she began crafting a plan that would allow her to balance the two most important goals in her life: protecting her son and uncovering the truth behind Henry's death. Every move had to be calculated, every step carefully considered. Scarlett knew she couldn't do this alone, and there was only one person she could truly trust with this burden: Zoe. Zoe had always been a voice of reason, urging Scarlett to accept Henry's death and move forward. But she was also Henry's sister, a fiercely intelligent lawyer with resources and a sharp mind for strategy. Scarlett believed that when it came to Matthew's safety, Zoe would stand by her without question. And so, the next morning, Scarlett made her way to meet Zoe, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to share. As Matthew played in the yard, blissfully unaware of the dangers looming over them, Scarlett sat down with her sister-in-law. She poured everything out: Sebastian's sudden appearance, the cryptic threats, Matthew's claim of seeing his father, and her unyielding determination to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Zoe listened in silence, her brow furrowed with worry as she absorbed every word. Scarlett watched her sister-in-law's expression closely, praying that Zoe would understand the gravity of the situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zoe spoke. "You're not alone in this, Scarlett. We will protect Matthew, no matter what it costs." Her words brought immediate relief to Scarlett, a validation of her fears and determination. Zoe reached out and took Scarlett's hand, her voice steady and reassuring. "I've always admired your strength for raising my brother's son alone after he was gone. I never saw you fall apart, even though I know how much you were hurting. You managed to care for Matthew with so much love. I will help you. We'll get through this together." Scarlett felt a wave of emotion crash over her, and tears filled her eyes. Zoe's support was exactly what she needed, a lifeline in the darkness that had consumed her. Together, they began to devise a plan to ensure Matthew's safety while Scarlett continued her quest for answers. They decided to alternate Matthew's stays between trusted family members, keeping him constantly on the move and out of reach from anyone who might try to harm him. Every detail was considered, from emergency contacts to backup plans, all designed to keep Matthew safe from the shadowy threats lurking in the background. But as they solidified the plan, Zoe's expression grew more serious. She looked Scarlett in the eyes and said, "I have to warn you, Scarlett. My brother is dead. If you go after this organization, you're putting yourself in danger. Henry can no longer help you. He's really gone. And if you pursue these criminals, you need to be prepared for the risks. They're not playing games." Scarlett felt the familiar sting of doubt creeping in, but she pushed it aside. "You think I'm crazy, don't you? But Matthew saw him too," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't care if it's risky. Even if you're right and Henry is gone, I need to clear his name. I can't let his memory be tainted by whatever criminal organization he might have been caught up in. I need to know the truth, Zoe. I need to know who he really was." Tears streamed down Scarlett's face as she spoke, the weight of her grief and determination mingling into a single driving force. She couldn't let Henry's legacy be overshadowed by lies and half-truths. Whether he was alive or not, she owed it to him and to herself to uncover the truth. Zoe sighed deeply, recognizing the resolve in Scarlett's eyes. There was no changing her mind, no convincing her to walk away from this. "All right," Zoe said quietly, squeezing Scarlett's hand. "We'll find the truth, whatever it may be. But please, Scarlett, be careful. We'll protect Matthew, but you need to protect yourself too. Don't do anything reckless." Scarlett nodded, her heart still heavy with uncertainty, but bolstered by Zoe's support. She had allies now, and with that she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was no turning back. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she was ready to face whatever lay in her path. For Matthew, for Henry, and for herself. Scarlett's mind was a whirlwind of doubt and determination as she sat with Zoe, contemplating the terrifying possibility. What if they had tricked us into believing Sebastian was Henry? The thought was maddening, leaving her teetering on the edge of despair. But no matter how painful or dangerous the truth might be, she knew she couldn't live in this limbo of uncertainty any longer. Wiping away her tears, she met Zoe's gaze with unwavering resolve. "I need to know the truth, Zoe, no matter what it costs. I can't keep living like this." Zoe nodded, her worry evident, but she understood the fire burning in Scarlett's heart. "Then we'll do this together," she said firmly. "But we need to be smart about it. I'll reach out to some trusted contacts, people who can help us dig deeper without drawing too much attention." And so, the two women threw themselves into the investigation, carefully unraveling the web of lies and deception surrounding Henry's death. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. The criminal organization Henry had possibly been involved with was far more powerful than they had ever imagined. Every new piece of evidence revealed layers of corruption and influence that stretched far beyond anything they had anticipated. The risks grew with each discovery, and it wasn't long before they realized they were being watched. Scarlett began noticing unfamiliar cars parked near her house, vehicles that lingered too long, with drivers who seemed to disappear whenever she tried to get a closer look. Then came the anonymous phone calls, each one carrying thinly veiled threats. The messages were clear: "Stop digging," or "Face the consequences." Scarlett memorized the numbers, comparing them to the ones used during Matthew's kidnapping, and noticed subtle differences that only heightened her paranoia. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on her, inch by inch. The isolation became unbearable. To protect those she cared about, Scarlett distanced herself from her friends and family. She couldn't risk dragging them into the storm that had engulfed her life. But the loneliness was suffocating, leaving her with nothing but her thoughts and fears as she fought against the overwhelming desolation. The world around her felt like a cage, closing in from all sides, and every day brought new reminders that she and Matthew were never truly safe. The breaking point came one night when Scarlett returned home to find her sanctuary violated. The house had been ransacked, drawers overturned, papers scattered everywhere, but nothing of value had been taken. The message was clear: "We can get to you whenever we want." Scarlett stood in the middle of the chaos, her heart pounding with fear and anger. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was in far deeper than she had imagined, and Matthew's life was now at even greater risk. Sitting amidst the wreckage of her daily life, Scarlett faced the harsh truth. Continuing her investigation meant risking not only her life, but also the lives of those she loved. The chilling thought of what could have happened if Matthew had been home when the intruders broke in gnawed at her. She remembered Henry's words from long ago: "When a criminal is close to being discovered, they take exaggerated measures." That's how we catch them. The fact that they had come to her house meant she was getting closer to the truth. But the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. Despite the terror gripping her heart, Scarlett knew she couldn't back down now. She had gathered enough evidence to bring the criminals to justice: the USB drive from the apartment, the documents Henry had left behind, all the pieces of the puzzle she and Zoe had painstakingly put together. But it wasn't enough. To end this nightmare once and for all, she needed a confession, something that would force the truth into the light. Zoe had been instrumental in helping her gather evidence, even though she remained skeptical about the possibility of Henry being alive. Scarlett appreciated her sister-in-law's steadfast support, even as doubts lingered between them. But Scarlett knew that, in the end, this battle was hers to fight. She had to see it through, for Matthew's sake, for Henry's memory, and for her own peace of mind. Taking a deep breath, Scarlett made her decision. She would report everything she had uncovered to the authorities, no matter the risks. But she would do so carefully, using the connections Zoe had helped her establish to ensure that the information reached the right hands. There could be no mistakes, no room for error in a game as dangerous as this. And as she prepared for the next step in her journey, Scarlett felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would protect Matthew at all costs, but she would also uncover the truth, no matter how deep or dark it led her. The stakes had never been higher, but Scarlett was ready. The fear still lingered, a constant companion in the shadows, but her determination burned brighter. The time for hiding was over. Now, it was time to confront the truth. Scarlett stood alone in the eye of the storm, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her shoulders. She had reached a point where there was no turning back. The criminal network that had infiltrated her life, the same one that had ensnared Henry in its web, needed to be stopped if Matthew was ever to be safe. She could no longer rely on anyone else to save them. This was her battle to fight. "I have to protect my family at all costs," she whispered, her resolve solidifying into unbreakable steel. The organization she was up against was massive, powerful beyond comprehension. The evidence she had collected showed just how deeply they had infiltrated society, blackmailing and forging documents, posing as influential people, and manipulating events from the shadows. Their reach extended across the nation, making them seemingly untouchable. And Henry, somehow, had gotten caught up in the middle of it all, either as a pawn forced to serve them or as a rogue element fighting to bring them down from within. With the evidence in hand, Scarlett knew she had only one option left: confront them head-on. She picked up her phone, the number from the previous threatening call etched into her memory. This was the moment that could change everything, the moment that could either save her family or doom her to the same fate that had befallen Henry. "They need to be stopped for Matthew to be safe," she murmured, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number. The man on the other end answered, his voice filled with menace. He tried to intimidate her, to make her back down, but Scarlett was no longer afraid. She arranged a meeting with him, knowing full well the risks she was taking. "They might kill me," she thought, but the idea didn't shake her resolve. She couldn't allow them to harm her son, and she couldn't let Henry's name be tarnished by their lies. Before heading to the meeting, Scarlett knelt and prayed, her heart heavy with fear and hope. "Lord, please protect me and Matthew from harm. I know they are dangerous, but I have your protection," she whispered, feeling a calm strength wash over her as she stood back up. She was ready. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The designated location was a forgotten, grim part of the city, an industrial wasteland of abandoned buildings and darkened alleyways. Scarlett's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, her senses on high alert. She activated the listening device that Zoe had given her, a tiny piece of technology that could be her last line of defense. "Lord, protect me," she prayed again, her faith her only shield against the unknown. As she moved into the shadows, the oppressive silence of the place felt like it was closing in on her. Suddenly, she felt a hand grab her firmly, pulling her into the darkness before she had a chance to scream. Panic surged through her, but then she saw him. Henry alive, standing right in front of her. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat as a wave of shock, joy, and disbelief crashed over her. Henry, the man she thought she had lost forever, was alive. Before she could even begin to process what was happening, Henry pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss so full of love and desperation that it left no room for doubt. It was him, her Henry. She would recognize that kiss anywhere, even if everything around her ceased to exist. Tears filled Scarlett's eyes as she clung to him, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. But before she could say anything, Henry pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "I couldn't stay away, Scarlett," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "But we don't have much time. They're coming. We have to get out of here." Scarlett's heart pounded in her chest as she nodded, still reeling from the shock of seeing him alive. She wanted to ask him everything: how he had survived, why he had been forced into hiding, what the organization had done to him, but there was no time. All that mattered now was escaping the danger that loomed over them. Hand in hand, they moved swiftly through the shadows, Henry leading the way. Scarlett's mind spun with 1,000 unanswered questions, but the feel of his hand in hers, the warmth of his presence, was enough to keep her moving forward. She had found him alive. Whatever else happened, they would face it together. But as they navigated through the darkness, Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that their reunion was just the beginning of a far more dangerous game. The criminal network had let them get this close, and that meant they were prepared for something more. Scarlett knew that she and Henry would have to be smarter, stronger, and more united than ever to survive what was coming next. For now, though, all that mattered was that they had found each other again. And as they slipped away into the night, Scarlett silently vowed that she would protect her family no matter the cost, no matter the danger. Together they would confront whatever lay ahead, and she wouldn't stop until the truth was fully revealed and justice was served. Henry's voice, filled with both urgency and relief, cut through Scarlett's swirling emotions. "I have a lot to explain, my love, but now we need to be quick," he said, gripping her hand tightly as though afraid to let go. Scarlett couldn't tear her eyes away from him, her heart racing as she struggled to comprehend the impossible. "Is it really you, Henry?" I don't believe it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The love she felt surged through her, flooding her with warmth and certainty. This was no illusion. Henry was alive, standing right in front of her. How could I have ever believed that Sebastian was Henry? Scarlett thought, feeling foolish for doubting the man she loved. Now, in his presence, every part of her came alive, reaffirming what she had always known deep down: this was her husband. "You're alive, my love." "I'm not crazy," she said, half to herself, half to Henry, as relief and disbelief intertwined. But their reunion was short-lived. From the shadows, men began to emerge, faces she recognized from the photos on the USB drive. The very criminals she had been trying to expose were now here, intent on ensuring the truth remained buried. Their presence sent a jolt of terror through her, and the realization that danger was imminent brought everything into sharp focus. In a desperate act of bravery, Henry stepped forward, positioning himself between Scarlett and the approaching threat. "Run, Scarlett. Protect Matthew," he shouted, his voice filled with an urgent command. Before she could even process his words, the air was split by the deafening crack of a gunshot. The world seemed to slow as Scarlett watched in horror as Henry fought with the men, trying to protect her. Chaos erupted as gunfire and shouts filled the air, and then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Henry and the criminals had vanished into the darkness, leaving Scarlett standing alone, terrified and disoriented. The silence that followed was suffocating. Scarlett's mind raced with 1,000 unanswered questions, her heart pounding in her chest as panic threatened to overtake her. Have I lost him again? The thought was unbearable. Desperation gripped her as she forced herself to move, to escape the scene before it was too late. But even as she fled, Henry's words echoed in her mind, fueling her determination. He had risked everything to protect her, to protect Matthew. Now it was up to her to finish what they had started. Fear and uncertainty swirled around her, But a new strength welled up inside Scarlett, an unyielding resolve to see this through. She could no longer afford to be the terrified woman on the sidelines. She had to take action, not just for herself, but for the sake of her family, and to honor the sacrifice Henry seemed willing to make for them. With that in mind, Scarlett made her way to the police station where Henry had worked, her heart heavy but her determination unwavering. She carried with her the evidence she had gathered, every document, every detail that might bring the criminal network down. This wasn't just about protecting Matthew anymore, it was about uncovering the truth and exposing the organization that had wreaked havoc on their lives. She owed it to Henry, to their son, and to herself to see this through. When she arrived at the station, Scarlett demanded to speak with the officers in charge, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She presented everything she had, laying out the web of deceit that connected the organization to the events surrounding Henry's disappearance and involvement. The police listened intently, their expressions grim as they realized the gravity of what Scarlett was revealing. But then came the hard truth. A final confrontation would be necessary. There was no other way to bring the criminals to justice. It would be dangerous, potentially life-threatening, but it was the only way to put an end to the madness once and for all. The decision felt like a death sentence, yet at the same time it was a chance. A chance to finally free her family from the grip of this nightmare, to bring justice to Henry, and to protect Matthew from the shadows that had haunted them for too long. Scarlett knew what she had to do. She had come too far to back down now. The fear was still there, gnawing at her with every breath, but she pushed it aside. For Henry, for Matthew, for the life they deserved. She would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The phone call felt like a dagger to Scarlett's heart. The cold, calculated voice on the other end claimed to have both Henry and Matthew, and hearing her son's cry in the background nearly destroyed her. Scarlett's world seemed to stop, her breath caught in her throat as icy terror consumed her. But amidst the fear, a fierce determination took hold. She wouldn't bow to their demands. She had come too far to surrender everything now. Scarlett resolved to find a way to save her family with the police at her side. She devised a plan, one that was risky but necessary. She would agree to the handover, but on her terms, ensuring that the police were ready to intervene and capture the criminals. It was a dangerous game, one that put her directly in harm's way, but there was no other choice. She would do anything to save Henry and Matthew. In the early hours of the morning, Scarlett made her way to the designated location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The darkness was thick, oppressive, and filled with uncertainty, but Scarlett knew it would provide the police with the cover they needed to hide and prepare for the operation. Clutching a fake briefcase that supposedly contained the evidence, she stepped into the warehouse, her heart pounding with each step. As she entered the vast, echoing space, shadows shifted around her. She could barely make out the figures moving in the darkness. Then, to her horror, Henry was shoved into the dim light. He was visibly injured but alive, his face bruised and bloodied. Scarlett's instinct screamed at her to run to him, to cradle him in her arms, but she forced herself to stay calm, to stick to the plan. She couldn't afford to let her emotions take over, not when so much was at stake. But then she saw him, Matthew, her little boy, standing there, held by the criminals. The sight of him in their grasp made her legs weaken, and tears filled her eyes. "My little Matthew," she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. It was agony to hold herself back, to resist the overwhelming urge to rush forward and scoop him into her arms. But she couldn't let the criminals see her vulnerability. She had to stay strong. "Release my son, and I'll hand over everything," Scarlett demanded, trying to keep her voice steady even though her heart was pounding in her chest. Every fiber of her being wanted to beg, to plead, but she knew that wouldn't work. She had to maintain control, no matter how much it hurt. From the shadows, Sebastian emerged. His smile was twisted with cruelty, and his cold laughter sent chills down Scarlett's spine. "Who are you to decide anything?" he sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We own this city. Do you really think you can make anyone believe you?" He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Hand over the evidence." Scarlett's hands tightened around the briefcase. She needed to stall, to give the police more time. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling as she glanced at Matthew, desperately trying to catch a glimpse of his innocent face through the dim light. She needed to keep him safe, but she also needed answers. Why did Henry refuse to cooperate? He should do it for someone in the family, right? Sebastian's grin widened, and he glanced at Henry before turning back to Scarlett. "Oh, Henry didn't tell you, did he?" he taunted, his voice filled with dark amusement. "He's my brother. Half-brother, technically. Our father abandoned me, pretended I didn't exist. But when I started this organization and the police began to close in, I reached out to Henry for help. I thought he would protect his own blood, but instead, he turned his back on me, on family. And for that, I will destroy everything he holds dear." Scarlett's mind reeled. Sebastian was Henry's brother? She had never heard of him, had no idea this man even existed until a few weeks ago. How could Henry have kept something like this from her? The shock was almost too much to process, but she couldn't afford to be overwhelmed now. She had to stay focused, for Matthew's sake. "Please let my son go," she pleaded, her voice breaking as she locked eyes with Matthew. His gray eyes, so much like Henry's, were filled with innocent confusion. She had to save him. She couldn't let him be a pawn in this twisted game. But Sebastian just smiled, his expression as cold as ever. "You're in no position to make demands, Scarlett. Hand over the evidence, or your son will pay the price." Scarlett's heart raced as she glanced at Henry, who was watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pain and determination. She couldn't give up now, not when they were so close. Taking a deep breath, she prepared herself for the final, most dangerous part of the plan. She had to trust that the police were ready, that they would intervene before it was too late. "Lord, give me strength," she prayed silently as she prepared to take the next step in her perilous journey to save her family. Scarlett's heart pounded as Sebastian's words sank in. The malice in his voice was like a knife twisting in her gut. He had been in the house with Matthew. The thought made her blood run cold. Scarlett's mind raced with questions, but one stood out among them all. Why did you lie? Why pretend to be Henry? She voiced the question, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. Why did you do it, Sebastian? Why pretend to be him? Her mind flashed back to that moment when she had first seen him and had been fooled, even for a second, into thinking Henry had returned to her. Sebastian's twisted smile only deepened. I needed to know if Henry had truly died. The only person he would have told the truth to was you. So I became him. I wanted to see if you knew anything, if you would slip up. But you didn't know a thing. That was my mistake. You're more curious than I expected. And now, because of your meddling, I have to kill you all. You know too much. With those chilling words, Sebastian raised his gun, aiming it directly at Scarlett. Her breath caught in her throat, fear clawing at her insides. Time seemed to slow as she realized this might be the end for her, for Henry, for Matthew. But before Sebastian could pull the trigger, chaos erupted around them. The police signal was given, and officers flooded into the warehouse. The sound of gunfire exploded in the vast, echoing space, and everything turned into a blur of motion. Scarlett's instincts kicked in, and she ran toward Matthew, desperate to shield him from the danger. Shots rang out all around her, and she could hear shouts and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground. But all she could focus on was getting to her son. She saw Henry in the midst of the chaos, fighting with one of the kidnappers, his every movement fueled by the fierce determination to protect her and Matthew. He was relentless, battling with a wild intensity that filled her with both pride and terror. Then, through the haze of panic, Scarlett saw Matthew. He was running toward her, his small arms outstretched, oblivious to the danger around him. All he knew was that he wanted to be with his mother. Her heart surged with both fear and love as she reached for him, scooping him into her arms and holding him tightly against her chest. She could feel his little heart pounding against hers, the warmth of his body grounding her amidst the chaos. Scarlett cradled Matthew in her arms, shielding him with her own body as she frantically searched for Henry, desperate to ensure he was safe. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of the police shouting orders, the clash of bodies, and the gunfire that seemed to echo endlessly. But then, slowly the chaos began to subside. One by one, the men were apprehended, handcuffed, and dragged away. The fight was over. As the dust settled, Scarlett let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Tears of relief and gratitude welled in her eyes as she clutched Matthew to her, whispering, "Thank you, my God, for taking care of my family." The weight of everything that had happened, the fear, the uncertainty, the danger crashed over her. But now, in this moment, all she felt was overwhelming relief. Henry appeared beside them, battered but alive, his eyes filled with the same relief and love she felt. He wrapped his arms around her and Matthew, pulling them both into a tight embrace. Scarlett leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, and the safety of his presence. She never wanted to let go. "We're together now." "That's all that matters," Henry whispered, his voice soft but full of emotion. He kissed the top of Matthew's head, then gently pressed his lips to Scarlett's, sealing the moment with a promise of love and protection. Scarlett closed her eyes, letting herself melt into the embrace. After everything they had been through, after all the fear and uncertainty, they were together. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. As the family headed home, the weight of what had transpired slowly began to lift, though the reality of Henry's presence still felt surreal to Scarlett. She found herself stealing glances at him, afraid that if she looked away for even a moment, he might vanish. It was as if she needed constant reassurance that he was truly there, alive and safe. Every time Henry caught her worried gaze, he smiled softly and repeated the same comforting words. "I love you, my love." "I'm okay," he would say, his voice gentle, trying to soothe her frayed nerves. Scarlett finally allowed herself to breathe. "I knew we would make it," she said, a mixture of relief and disbelief in her voice. Despite the danger they had faced, they were all safe now. They had survived, and they were together. When they arrived home, Zoe was already there, waiting anxiously. Relief washed over her face as soon as she saw them, though it was quickly replaced by worry and guilt. "I am so sorry I didn't arrive sooner to stop Sebastian from taking Matthew," she cried, rushing to hug her nephew tightly. "He broke into my house, probably discovered that we were investigating, and took our boy. I would never have forgiven myself if anything had happened to him." Tears streamed down her face as she joined the family embrace, clinging to them as if she never wanted to let go. Henry, seeing that the immediate danger had passed and they were safe, knew it was time to explain everything to fill in the gaps that had caused Scarlett so much pain and confusion. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice heavy with regret and the weight of the decisions he had made. "I had to fake my death to protect all of you," Henry began, his eyes searching Scarlett's for understanding. "I spent my whole life believing I only had one sister. I never could have imagined that our father was capable of hiding something so important from us. But then, one day at work, Sebastian came to me. He revealed himself as my half-brother and demanded my help. He was a criminal, asking me to interfere with an investigation into his organization. He wanted me to get an investigator from another precinct to back off. That's when I knew I had to act." Henry's face grew darker as he continued, recounting the painful steps that had led him to where they were now. "I pretended to cooperate with Sebastian's organization, getting closer to them, all the while gathering evidence to bring them down. But he discovered what I was doing. Sebastian's organization was brutal. They blackmailed everyone and killed those who couldn't be manipulated. I knew that you, Scarlett, and Matthew would be in danger if I didn't disappear. Faking my death was the only way I could protect you while continuing my investigation in secret. Scarlett listened intently, trying to absorb everything Henry was telling her. Each word felt like a revelation, and yet there was still so much she needed to understand. "And Matthew," she asked, her voice trembling, "was it you who took him to the park?" Henry nodded, his expression filled with regret. "Yes, I never wanted to involve our son, but I knew that Sebastian was watching us closely. I needed to keep Matthew safe. I thought that if I scared you enough, you might stop investigating. I knew what Sebastian was capable of. And I didn't want you or Matthew to get caught in the crossfire. But when Sebastian found out I was alive, everything escalated. That's why I had to ask you to stop. I was trying to protect you both." He squeezed Scarlett's hand tightly, his eyes pleading for her understanding. "I warned you at the building that you needed to stop investigating," he said with a small, rueful smile. "But I'm glad you didn't listen, my love. You saved all of us. You saved our family. I owe you my life." Tears welled up in Scarlett's eyes as she looked at Henry, feeling a flood of emotions she couldn't quite name: relief, love, sadness, and gratitude all at once. She had been through so much, but now, here they were, together again. They had faced unimaginable danger, and yet, against all odds, they had come out on the other side. "We did it together," Scarlett whispered, leaning into Henry's embrace. "We saved each other." And as the family held each other close, the weight of the past began to lift. The shadows of doubt and fear that had haunted Scarlett slowly faded, replaced by the warmth of love and the strength of the bond they shared. They had survived the darkness, and now together they could finally look toward the light. "Without you, my love, my world has no meaning," Scarlett whispered, tears streaming down her face as she clung to Henry. His words had wrapped themselves around her heart, a lifeline in the storm of emotion she had endured. She had defied every obstacle, every fear, and fought with all her strength to protect her family. Against impossible odds, she had dismantled a dangerous criminal network and brought her husband back to them. Now, with the truth uncovered and justice served, they could finally breathe again. They could start over this time, as a family united by the love and resilience that had seen them through the darkest of days. In the following days, as the chaos gradually subsided and the normal rhythms of life began to reassert themselves, Scarlett, Henry, and Matthew cherished every moment they had together. The bonds between them, once stretched thin by secrets and fear, grew stronger with each passing day. They revisited the park where Matthew had once spoken of sharing ice cream with his father, only this time there were no shadows lurking, no secrets threatening to tear them apart. They were whole again. As they watched Matthew play, carefree and full of joy, Henry turned to Scarlett, his eyes filled with promise. "I swear to you, I will never leave you again," he vowed softly. "No more secrets, no more darkness." With the turbulence behind them, the family found themselves standing on the threshold of new beginnings. Scarlett, driven by the same determination that had seen her through the hardest moments of her life, finally brought her long-held dream to life. She opened her own pastry shop, Sweet Hopes, a name that perfectly captured the essence of her journey. The shop quickly became a beloved cornerstone of the community, a place where the sweet scent of freshly baked pastries and cakes filled the air with the promise of brighter days. Every creation she made was a reflection of her story, her rise from the depths of despair to the light of hope and joy. Henry, too, found recognition for his bravery and sacrifice. The precinct honored him for his role in dismantling the criminal network, and during the ceremony he stood with Scarlett by his side, a symbol of the partnership that had made it all possible. Henry received a Medal of Honor, a token of gratitude for his courage. But as the applause filled the room, Henry remained humble, crediting Scarlett as the true hero. "This medal belongs to my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Without her strength, I wouldn't be standing here today." Zoe, Henry's sister, was a constant presence during these moments of celebration. She had been a pillar of support throughout their ordeal, and now she shared in their joy, her smile reflecting the deep love and loyalty that had brought them all through the darkest of times. The unity of their family was stronger than ever, the bonds between them unbreakable. One sunny afternoon, Scarlett and Henry hosted a small gathering at Sweet Hopes to celebrate Henry's medal and the success of the shop. Friends, family, and loyal customers filled the space, the air buzzing with laughter, stories, and the clinking of glasses. Matthew, full of boundless energy and happiness, darted through the crowd, his laughter ringing out like music, a reminder of all that was good and pure in their lives. "Who could have imagined we'd be here?" Henry said quietly to Scarlett as he slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He looked out at the people around them, the smiles, the warmth, the sense of belonging, and shook his head in amazement. "After everything we've been through, here we are stronger, more united than ever." Scarlett looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. "We did it together," she replied, her voice steady with conviction. "And as long as we're together, I know there's nothing we can't face." Amid the sweet aromas of Scarlett's creations and the joyful conversations of those they held dear, Scarlett and Henry looked toward the future with a renewed sense of purpose. The victories they had achieved weren't just measured in medals or successful ventures. They were found in the simple, profound joy of being together as a family. Love, courage, and hope had carried them through the darkest of days, and now they knew those same ingredients would continue to shape their future. Their journey had led them to this moment, a place where peace, love, and fulfillment intertwined. And as they stood together, surrounded by the people who mattered most, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them hand in hand, stronger, more united, and more grateful than ever. What have you learned so far from this incredible story of love, courage, and resilience? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to dig deep and rely on your strength to protect those you love? Comment below with one thing you've learned from this story and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue to share inspiring stories like this one.